He was thrown out of a truck in the middle of a storm, once a military dog. Now discarded without a name, without a home. She was a runaway girl with nowhere left to turn. And he, a blind man who had already lost everything. None of them expected to be saved. But in one forgotten gas station at the edge of town, they found each other. This is not just a story about a dog. It's about survival, trust, and the quiet kind of love that rebuilds you when the world no longer believes you matter. Welcome to Toby, the dog who stopped believing. The rain had started mid-afternoon, but by nightfall, it had become a relentless downpour that turned the highway into a ribbon of black glass. Headlights carved streaks across the wet asphalt like old scars reopening under pressure, and the wind, cold and insistent, swept through the trees and across the pavement with the force of something trying to be forgotten. On the side of the road, just beyond the glare of the passing traffic, something moved small, heavy, soaked to the bone. A shadow, barely more than a shape, hunched low behind a broken guardrail, one paw limping, eyes hollow with something deeper than pain. Toby had once known a name, had once answered to it with purpose. That name was etched into military records and engraved on the small tag that now hung crookedly from his collar, tarnished by time and rusted from rain. He had been a working dog, a trained guardian of borders and people, taught to trust commands, to follow orders, to protect and detect, and never ask why. He had worn a harness like a badge, obeyed every whistle like it meant something sacred. But in the end, it wasn't a battle or a bomb that undid him. It was failure. One mission gone wrong. One mistake. A child hurt. And in the quiet aftermath, someone decided it was easier to erase him than retrain him. He didn't know the driver's name, the man who had taken him from the facility under the guise of transport to a shelter. He only remembered the moment the truck slowed to a stop near the old rest station, and the back doors opened wide to the night. A pair of rough hands grabbed his collar, dragged him forward, and shoved him into the wet. No words. No anger. Just the sound of boots turning back toward the vehicle, and the metal latch clicking shut. The tail lights faded into the fog and were gone. So he stood there for a while, not moving, not chasing, not barking. The rain soaked his fur, plastered it flat against his ribs. The scar beneath his left eye stung with the cold. His ears drooped not in fear, but in surrender. Toby didn't run, not because he didn't know how, but because he had nothing to run toward. He had been discarded like a mistake, and some part of him agreed. Time passed, though he couldn't say how long. The night deepened, the world growing quieter, except for the hum of tires and the endless hiss of rain. Eventually, his legs began to move not with purpose but with instinct. He limped forward along the gravel shoulder, head low, tail limp, body aching with every step. He didn't look back. A few miles down the road, nestled behind a shuttered gas station with peeling paint and a rusting roof, a small room sat tucked away behind the service bay, its single window glowing dimly under the strain of an old lamp. Inside, Leonard sat in his armchair, the one with stuffing poking from the sides and a blanket draped over the back. He was sipping coffee, black and bitter, his fingers wrapped around the chipped mug like it was the only thing holding him upright. His eyes, though once sharp and blue, now stared at nothing. The accident had taken his sight 6 years ago, and with it, much of what he had loved. He hadn't written since. Not really. A few sentences scribbled in Braille. A few stories starred and abandoned. His world had shrunk to the size of the room he lived in, and the memory of his wife's laugh echoing faintly down the hall. He heard it before he felt it, a faint scratch, then a heavier thump against the door. Not forceful, just persistent, like something trying to exist. Leonard rose slowly, his legs stiff, hand brushing the wall as he made his way to the door. He hesitated for just a moment before unlocking it and pulling it open. Rain, cold and wild and immediate, but beneath it, something else. Breathing, wet, low to the ground. He knelt, one hand reaching out cautiously, fingers brushing fur. Thick, soaked, shaking. And then stillness. The dog didn't move, didn't growl, just stood there, letting the man's blind hand trace the side of his neck, his ears, the scar on his face. Leonard whispered, more to himself than anyone, "You're a big one, aren't you?" The dog didn't flinch. He turned slightly, stepped aside. "You want in or not?" he asked the dark. And Toby, without thinking, without knowing why, took a single step forward into the warm light, leaving the rain and the past outside. Neither of them said anything after that. But for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. The room smelled faintly of old books, burnt coffee, and something less definable, loneliness layered with dust. Toby stood in the doorway for a long time after Leonard had stepped away, his body tense as if waiting for the command to leave or the inevitable hand raised in warning. But neither came. The man had retreated to his chair, his back turned slightly, one hand trailing along the edge of the end table until it found the mug again. The dog took 2 steps inside. The wood floor beneath his paws creaked just enough to make him pause, ears twitching. The warmth hit him like something physical. Not just heat from the space heater humming in the corner, but something softer, something that lived in the walls, in the worn fabric of the armchair, in the steady breath of the man who did not see him, but somehow already knew he was there. Leonard sipped his coffee. The mug tapped gently against the table as he set it down. He didn't say anything. Toby moved to the far corner of the room and sat, dripping quietly onto the floor. His sides rose and fell in slow rhythm, more from exhaustion than calm. The scar above his eye itched, but he didn't lift a paw to scratch it. He watched. The man, the room, the silence, all of it. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The storm outside softened into a steady patter against the tin roof. Somewhere down the hall, a clock ticked, not loud, but enough to mark the emptiness between moments. Leonard eventually spoke. "You don't bark," he said quietly. Not a question, just a fact offered to the room. "I like that." Toby blinked once. "Too many things in this world make noise just to prove they exist," Leonard continued, shifting in his chair, hands folded on his lap. "But the ones who don't they're the ones you listen to most." Toby didn't move, but something in the way his ears tilted forward said he was listening. The next morning, Leonard found him still there, curled in a tight circle near the back door. As if unsure whether to believe the previous night had been real, the blanket had been left out, not offered, not forced, just there. It was untouched, but the edges had been nosed, sniffed, investigated in the way a dog tries to understand human intention. Leonard brewed coffee by memory. He didn't need to see. His hands knew the shape of the kettle, the sound of the bubbling water, the exact weight of 2 scoops of grounds. When the smell filled the room, Toby stirred. He didn't whine or yawn. He stood and walked carefully, every step considered. He stopped just short of the kitchen entrance. "You don't need permission," Leonard said, pouring the coffee. "But you're welcome to wait until you get it. I understand that too." A bowl had been set on the floor. Not dog food. Leonard hadn't had reason to keep any but small scraps from the fridge. Some rice. A few bites of leftover chicken. Enough to show effort. Toby approached it slowly, pausing every few inches as if expecting it to be snatched away. When his nose touched the rim and nothing happened, he ate without sound, chewing slowly, glancing between bites toward the man at the counter. Leonard didn't watch him. He didn't need to. He felt the space between them shift, just slightly, like the first leaf turning before autumn truly arrives. That afternoon, Leonard sat on the porch steps with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The air was damp but bright, the last of the storm clouds drifting like bruises across the sky. Toby lay near the edge of the porch, body low, tail still. He didn't sleep. He simply stayed. Leonard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. A tag. It had fallen from Toby's collar earlier when Leonard had reached down to brush a leaf from his fur. He ran a thumb over it now, the metal cold and dented. The name was barely legible, Toby etched in military print, below it a number, long expired. No home address. No contact. Just a name that had outlived its purpose. "Toby," Leonard said aloud, testing the sound. The dog looked up. "I guess you remember it. Or maybe you don't. But that's who you are now, whether you like it or not." Toby didn't react. Not with a wag. Not with a shift of his head. But his eyes stayed on Leonard a moment longer than necessary. That was enough. The sun slipped lower. The porch grew cooler. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them was the first to go inside. The train came through once every few days. a low whistle slicing across the valley like a memory no one wanted to recall. It didn't stop here, not anymore. The platform was cracked and overgrown, the station shack boarded up years ago, but people still passed through. They always did, especially the ones who didn't want to be seen. That morning, as the whistle faded into the hills, a girl emerged from the trees behind the tracks. She was small for her age, no older than 11, with tangled dark hair pulled beneath a knit cap and a faded backpack that hung too low on her shoulders. Her sneakers were soaked from the grass, and the cuffs of her jeans were caked in mud. She moved like someone used to being ignored, like someone who had learned how to fold herself into silence. Rosie didn't know this town. She didn't plan to stay. It was just the next place on the map, a name she'd heard her grandmother say once over the phone. After her mother left and her father's house filled with fists and shadows, Rosie had stopped waiting for someone to save her. Instead, she started walking. The tracks had led her here. The night before, she'd slept in the back of an old train car, curled between burlap sacks and engine grease. She hadn't eaten since the crackers she stole from a vending machine 3 towns ago. Her stomach didn't growl anymore. It just ached quietly, like the rest of her. She found the gas station by accident, cutting through tall grass and following the scent of wood smoke. The building looked forgotten, leaning slightly to one side like a man who had given up standing straight. But there was warmth coming from the side window and movement behind the glass. Rosie stepped carefully to the edge of the wall, crouched low and waited. Toby saw her first. He had been lying beneath the porch, nose resting on his front paws, when the scent caught him wet fabric, nervous sweat, and the faint tang of blood dried and old. He lifted his head, ears angling toward the trees. The wind shifted and he saw her, a small shape, still as stone, just beyond the fence line. She didn't make a sound, but her eyes met his, wide and unblinking, and something passed between them. He didn't growl, didn't move. He just watched. Leonard opened the door moments later, coffee in hand. He stepped out slowly, as he always did, letting his foot find the edge of the porch before settling. "You feel it too?" he said to the air. Toby turned his head slightly but didn't bark. Leonard waited a moment. Then he said quietly, "I don't know who's out there, but you're not the first to think this place won't mind you staying." He went back inside. Rosie didn't follow him. Not yet. She waited until the sun had climbed higher, until the morning chill had lifted just enough for her fingers to stop shaking. Then she circled wide, staying hidden behind the brush, and made her way to the storage shed behind the gas station. The door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled of dust, motor oil, and old paper. There was a stack of folded blankets and a rusted cot with one leg shorter than the others. She sat there, back against the wall, and pulled out her sketchbook. It was the only thing she'd taken from the house, soft-bound, half-filled with charcoal drawings and smudges of memory. Her fingers, cold and stiff, turned to a fresh page. She drew the dog. Not perfectly, not with detail, but with attention. His head tilted slightly, one eye ringed in shadow. He had looked at her like no one had in weeks. Not with pity, not with warning, just recognition. She fell asleep like that, pencil still in hand. That evening, Leonard stepped outside again. The sun was lowering behind the trees, and the wind had taken on the scent of ash and pine. Toby sat near the porch edge, alert but calm. Leonard spoke gently. "She's still there, isn't she?" Toby looked toward the shed but didn't move. Leonard nodded. "Then I suppose she's meant to be." He placed a bowl of warm soup on the steps, along with a clean towel and a flashlight. He didn't walk toward the shed. He didn't knock or call out. He simply said, "If you're cold, this might help. If not, that's fine too. Either way, the door stays open." An hour later, Rosie crept to the steps under cover of twilight. Toby didn't bark. He watched her sniff the soup, cautious, calculating. She sat, sipped, wiped her mouth with her sleeve. Then she turned to the dog. "You didn't tell anyone?" she whispered. Toby blinked. And for the first time in days, Rosie smiled. The days grew quieter, not in absence, but in understanding. No one asked questions. Not Leonard. Not Toby. Not the girl. It was as if silence had formed a circle around the three of them, not to isolate, but to protect. Rosie still slept in the shed behind the station, her belongings stacked neatly in a plastic milk crate beside the cot. Each morning, she folded the blanket Leonard had left out for her with careful hands and placed it at the foot of the bed, like a thank you never spoken but always meant. She didn't knock when she approached the back steps. She didn't have to. Leonard always left the door unlocked during the day, and Toby, ever watchful, would nudge it open with his nose when she appeared near the porch. She would sit on the top step with her sketchbook in her lap, knees pulled close, and draw with the kind of focus only children who have seen too much seem to have. She didn't talk much. Sometimes a word here, a comment there. Mostly she let the pencil do the talking. Leonard spoke more, but never about her past, never about why she showed up or how long she planned to stay. He talked about the weather, about the birds he could still hear at dawn, about the sound of the clouds when they moved like weight over the valley. He told her about his wife, Maggie, how she used to sing while making toast, always off-key but always joyful. He described the way her fingers moved when she braided her hair, even though he had never seen them. He only knew by touch. Rosie listened, not with wide eyes or nods, but with stillness, the kind of stillness that meant she was memorizing every word. Toby, meanwhile, had become her shadow. Not close, not clingy, just there. She would stretch out her legs and he would lie at the far edge of the porch, watching her pencil trace lines across the page. When she yawned, he would lift his head. When she flinched at thunder, he would place himself between her and the door. He never barked, not even once. But Rosie had begun to trust the silence more than she had ever trusted voices. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of copper and lavender, Rosie handed Leonard a page from her sketchbook. He took it with careful hands, his fingers brushing the edges like the paper might vanish if touched too hard. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. Then, softly, "It's you. And Toby. And the porch." Leonard ran his fingertips gently across the drawing, tracing the lines. The shape of the chair, the outline of the dog, his own shoulders hunched slightly, the texture of his sweater. It was all there. "There. It's beautiful," he said. She shrugged, eyes down. "You can't see it," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but I can feel how it feels. And that's enough." She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. That night the wind picked up. Not enough to call it a storm, but enough to rattle the windows and send pine needles skittering across the roof. Rosie lay awake in the shed, eyes open, hand resting near her sketchbook. Toby lay just outside the door, ears alert, body still. He hadn't left her side since the third night. Not since the sound of a siren from the nearby highway had sent her into a quiet panic, curled beneath the cot, hands shaking. He hadn't tried to fix it. He had just lain down beside her and stayed. Now, he stirred. Something was wrong. Not a sound, exactly. Not a smell. But something in the wind. He stood, moved toward the edge of the property, nose to the air. He didn't bark. He simply watched the trees. Rosie sat up slowly, sensing it too. In the distance, headlights passed across the far hill, slowed, then disappeared. She didn't say anything. Neither did Toby. The next morning, Leonard found her already on the porch, legs dangling over the edge, eyes focused on nothing. "Did you sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Bad dream?" "No," she said. "Not a dream." He waited. "I think someone's looking for me," she said. Leonard nodded once. Then, softly, "Do you want to be found?" She didn't answer. But Toby moved closer and sat by her side. And for the first time since she arrived, Rosie reached out and rested her hand gently on his head. It started with a sound too familiar to ignore. Not the wind. Not the crows circling over the hill. It was the slow crunch of gravel beneath tires. The kind that didn't belong to anyone in this quiet part of town. Leonard was on the porch when he heard it, one hand resting on the armrest, the other curled loosely around a chipped mug still warm with tea. Toby had already risen, stiff-legged, nose pointed down the dirt road. His ears didn't twitch. His body didn't shake. But the stillness in him was sharper than any growl. Rosie was inside, brushing dust from her sketchbook, when the sound hit her. She froze mid-motion. Her hands tightened around the spiral binding until her knuckles went white. She didn't run to the window. She didn't need to. Her heart had already confirmed what her ears hadn't yet dared believe. She whispered, low and flat, like the breath had been knocked from her chest. "It's him." Leonard stood slowly. "Rosie," he called. "Go out the back. Quietly. Hide if you need to." But she didn't move. Toby turned his head and stared at her. Not with fear, not with urgency. With something else, something steady. Rosie met his eyes, swallowed, and nodded. The truck pulled up not far from the gas station, engine idling before it died. The door creaked open. A man stepped out. Tall. Thick shoulders. Ball cap low over his eyes. His boots crunched the gravel as he walked like he owned it. Leonard didn't move. He stood at the porch rail, arms relaxed, face unreadable. The man's voice came first, oily and casual. "I'm looking for someone," he said. Leonard tilted his head slightly. "You found a blind man and an old dog. You sure that's who you're after?" The man laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My stepdaughter. 11. Dark hair. Might be alone, or hiding." Leonard didn't flinch. "No kids here." The man glanced toward the shed. "She's run away before. She lies. Gets scared. You know how girls can be." Behind the house, Rosie crouched in the tall grass, heart hammering. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But she couldn't move. Not until Toby stepped beside her. He had circled around the back while Leonard kept the man talking. Now he was there, not barking, not pushing, just standing beside her, the way he always did. Rosie gripped the fur at his neck. Toby didn't move. The man stepped onto the porch. Leonard didn't back away. "You hear well, old man?" the man asked. "Well enough to know you shouldn't take another step," Leonard said evenly. The man chuckled again. "Or what?" And that was when the growl came. Low, deep, ancient. From the shadows beneath the porch, Toby stepped out, teeth bared, eyes blazing in a way Leonard had never heard before, not even in war stories. The sound of it wasn't loud. It was measured, focused, controlled, but it made the man stop cold. Toby's scar caught the afternoon light like a warning. The man raised his hands, half joking, half wary. "Easy, Mutt. I don't hurt dogs. But dogs remember." Toby didn't lunge. He didn't snap. He stood between Leonard and the man, body still as iron, waiting. Leonard's voice was quiet. "You should go. Now." The man's face darkened. His voice dropped. "You're harboring a minor. That's kidnapping. I can bring the law into this." Leonard nodded slowly. "Good. Do that. I'll call them for you." The man hesitated. Something in Toby's stance, calm but unyielding, began to press down harder than any threat. "I'll be back," the man muttered. "No," Leonard said. "You won't." The man turned, stormed back to the truck, and peeled off without another word. Toby didn't move until the sound of the engine disappeared into the hills. Then, only then, did he sit. That night, Rosie came back inside. She didn't speak for a long time. Leonard sat beside her on the floor, back against the wall, Toby lying at their feet like a piece of history that had come home. Finally, she whispered, "You didn't even see him, but you knew." Leonard nodded. So did Toby. She turned to the dog. "I think he used to be something," she said. "A soldier. Or a guard." Leonard smiled faintly. "He still is." Rosie reached out, placed her hand gently on Toby's back. "I think I am, too." Toby rested his head on her lap. And this time, it was Rosie who didn't let go. The gas station had always creaked, floorboards shifting with temperature, pipes groaning in the walls like old bones. But that night, after the man drove off and the sun dipped beneath the pines, the building made no sound at all, only breathing. 3 different rhythms. Rosie's shallow, tight around the edges. Leonard's slow and even. Toby's deep, steady, with the occasional shift of muscle beneath his coat like some old engine settling. They sat in the living room, Not because anyone asked them to, but because no one wanted to be alone. Rosie curled on the old couch, knees tucked to her chest, eyes not quite focused. Leonard rested in the armchair by the lamp, hands folded across his chest. Toby lay between them, stretched along the rug like a line connecting two lives that hadn't meant to meet but had anyway. No one spoke for a long time. Then Rosie broke the quiet, not loud, just a crack in the silence, like a breath drawn too sharply. He used to come into my room at night. Leonard didn't move, didn't shift, but he heard. I'd pretend to be asleep, she said. I'd turn toward the wall. Sometimes he'd leave, sometimes he wouldn't. The words were blunt, flat, not because she didn't feel, but because she'd had to say them to herself too many times before. I told my mom once, she added. She slapped me, said I was jealous. Leonard's jaw moved, once, like he'd swallowed something that didn't want to go down. I left after she took his side, packed my things the next day, didn't even bring socks. Rosie looked down at her hands. I don't even know what I am anymore, she whispered. A runaway? A liar? A problem? Leonard sat forward slightly, elbows on his knees. His voice was low. You're a survivor. She looked up. And that's not a pretty word, he added. It doesn't mean you're strong or fearless. It just means you kept going when everything else told you to stop. Rosie blinked hard. He continued. My wife died in a car crash. I was driving. Fog rolled in too fast. She told me to slow down, but I thought I knew the road better than the weather. His voice didn't waver, but the air around him did. She was gone before I even crawled from the wreck. I lost my sight 2 weeks later. Damage to the optic nerve, permanent. Rosie didn't say anything. Leonard took a breath. People told me it wasn't my fault. That grief makes people careless. That it was the storm, the angle, the timing. He leaned back in his chair. But I still hear her voice every time I pour coffee. Every time the wind picks up. Every time I smell rain. Toby stirred slightly at the word. Leonard reached down, his hand finding the dog's shoulder. And him, he said. He didn't tell me anything about his past. But I know. Rosie looked at the dog, lying still, eyes open. There's a calm in him, Leonard said. The kind you don't get unless you've survived something no one else saw. Rosie let her hand slide from her knee down to Toby's fur. He doesn't bark, she murmured. Even when he's scared. He doesn't need to, Leonard replied. He knows when to act. They sat like that for a while, breathing, the house warm around them, the outside world sealed off by darkness and distance. Eventually, Rosie whispered, Do you think people can ever go back to who they were before? Leonard shook his head, but not with sadness. No, he said. But sometimes they become someone better, someone real. Rosie nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. Toby shifted, resting his head on her foot. That night, when Leonard rose to go to bed, he paused at the hallway. You're welcome to stay inside, he said to Rosie. She looked toward the door, then at Toby, then back at Leonard. Okay, she said. He turned the light off, and for the first time in many months, 3 lives that had been scattered like broken glass settled under the same roof, quiet, whole and breathing in the dark. It began with a shift in the air. Not the kind you notice with your skin, but the kind you feel in your ribs before anything moves. Toby had sensed it before. Back in training. Before storms, before sirens, before fire. It was like the world inhaled and forgot how to breathe out. That afternoon, the wind had turned dry, whispering through the pine trees in a tone that sounded too much like warning. Leonard sat on the porch, hands wrapped around a warm mug, listening to the pressure drop. His bones ached in ways they hadn't since the accident. Rosie was in the shed, sketching with one leg tucked under her and the other bouncing nervously. Toby paced, not in panic but in calculation, his head low, nose lifting slightly every few minutes, ears tracking the horizon like radar. He had gone quiet, more than usual, focused. Then came the sirens. Not loud at first, just a single whine far off swallowed by hills, then another. Then the hum of trucks passing the edge of town. Leonard set his mug down slowly. "Fire," he said. Rosie stood at the shed door, her hand frozen mid-page. The air smelled faintly of smoke, distant but rising. They heard the knock 10 minutes later. It was brief, firm. A rhythm meant for urgency, not politeness. Leonard opened the door. It was Dale, the mechanic from down the road. Breathless, sweat on his neck despite the cold. "It's jumped the creek," he said. Wind changed. Headed toward the East Ridge. "We've got hikers trapped in a camper up near Millstone. Narrow road. Emergency crews can't get all the way in." Leonard didn't speak. "You used to be a firefighter," Dale added. "They're asking for volunteers." Rosie stepped into the doorway. "He's blind," she said, the word sharper than intended. Leonard smiled faintly. "Only on one side of the world." Dale hesitated. "I've got a truck. If you want to ride up, I'll be there." Leonard turned to Rosie. "Stay inside. Pack a bag in case you have to evacuate. Listen to the radio. Keep Toby close." But Toby was already gone. He had slipped out the back as soon as the truck pulled up. Now he stood by the open gate, body rigid, eyes pointed toward the ridge. He didn't bark. He didn't look back. But when Leonard appeared, flashlight in hand, Toby stepped forward, like he knew where they were going. They rode in silence, bumping along the gravel trail toward the smoke-darkened ridge. Wind tore through the trees like claws. Pine needles rained sideways. The sun, once golden, now hung dim and orange behind the haze. When they reached the blockade, Leonard stepped out, cane tapping gravel, guided by Dale's voice. Toby walked beside him, no leash, no hesitation. "There," Dale pointed. Beyond the bend, campers off-road, stuck behind a downed tree. Family inside. One of them's a baby. Toby's ears twitched. Leonard turned to him. "Can you find them?" Toby looked once at the fire line, then ran. It was not the run of panic. It was memory. Precision. Purpose. He darted through brush and ash, paws hitting ground in a rhythm no longer trained but remembered. The smoke stung, but he blinked through it. The heat pressed down, but he moved faster. The camper was half buried in smoke. A woman pounded against the door, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Inside," someone cried. Toby reached the door and barked, once. Loud, sharp. The woman looked down. Their eyes locked. She stopped shouting. He barked again, then turned, sprinted toward the clearing, stopped, looked back. She understood. Minutes later, Leonard arrived, breathing heavy, guided by Dale's arm. The woman stumbled toward them, coughing, baby wrapped in a jacket. Toby ran back once, twice, until the last man, bleeding from his leg, limped out behind her. They made it just before the wind shifted again, turning the trees into walls of flame. Back in town, Rosie waited. She sat on the floor, bag packed, flashlight in her lap. The radio hissed with static, then with voices, then names. Then, finally Toby. Local rescue dog assists in Millstone Ridge evacuation. Credited with locating trapped family. Rosie dropped the flashlight. She ran to the porch. When Dale's truck pulled up, Leonard stepped out first, stood on his face, jacket soaked. Toby followed, limping slightly, one paw scorched, fur darkened with ash but standing. He walked up the steps, slow and tired, and sat in front of Rosie. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She knelt and wrapped both arms around his neck. And this time, Toby leaned into it. Not because he had to. Because he believed again. The town woke slowly after the fire. Smoke still hung in the branches of trees like a warning that hadn't finished speaking. Some homes were lost on the far side of the ridge. Others were saved by little more than a shift in wind and a stroke of grace. In the mornings, people opened their windows not to let the air in, but to make sure it was still there, breathing, real, unburned. At the edge of the town, the old gas station stood untouched. The wind had turned just in time. Rosie said it was because Toby had gone into the fire first. Leonard said it was just wind, but neither one truly believed that. Toby lay on a folded blanket near the front window, his front paw wrapped in gauze, fur singed in patches that would grow back strange but honest. He slept often now. Not from injury, but from rest, deep, earned, dreamless rest. Rosie would watch him sometimes while she drew, one leg swinging from the porch rail, sketchpad resting on her knee. She no longer drew Toby as a mystery. She drew him as he was, solid, whole, scarred, hers. Leonard moved more slowly than before, though he said it wasn't the fire. It was the memory of one. But something in him had changed too. He whistled when he made coffee now. The sound was crooked and tuneless, but it filled the kitchen with a kind of warmth that made the walls feel closer, kinder. He walked through the house with Toby's tag in his pocket, the one with the name barely visible. Sometimes he'd press his thumb against it and smile like it was something holy. One afternoon, Rosie asked if she could stay. She didn't say forever. She didn't ask for adoption papers or school forms. She just sat beside Leonard on the porch, hands in her lap, voice quiet. "I don't want to go back, not even to visit." Leonard nodded. "Glah." "You don't have to," he said. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled. And just like that, a decision became a promise. A few days later, they visited the sheriff's office. Rosie told her story. Everything. No edits. No pauses. Her voice didn't shake. And when it was over, she walked out of the station holding Leonard's hand and never looked back. The sheriff said the man wouldn't come again. And if he did, he'd find more than just a dog waiting for him. Word spread about the rescue. Someone from the local paper came by. Leonard gave no quote. Rosie offered no photo. Toby didn't pose. They just said thank you and let the story pass like wind across the roof. One evening, as autumn leaned into winter, Leonard brought out a battered box from the back closet. Inside were scraps of his old life, writing pads, journals, the tape recorder he once used to dictate stories. He sat at the kitchen table, turned on the recorder, and spoke. "This is for the dog who walked through fire not to be brave, but because someone needed him." He paused. "For the girl who stopped running. And for the man who thought he had nothing left to offer." He clicked it off. Rosie stood in the doorway, arms folded. "Is it a new story?" she asked. Leonard nodded. "I think it's the only one I've ever really meant." That night, the house glowed soft with light. Not bright, not loud, just steady. The porch lamp flickered once, then steadied again, casting its glow over the steps where Toby slept, one paw curled under his chin. Rosie sat beside him, blanket around her shoulders, sketching quietly beneath the stars. Leonard sat just inside the door, listening to the scratch of pencil, the even breath of the dog, the small laugh Rosie let out when the wind caught the corner of her page. And in that moment, there was no broken past, no silence that hadn't already been filled, no storm that hadn't already passed. There was only now. And for the first time, the porch light wasn't left on for someone who might come home. It was for the ones who already had. Sometimes the bravest ones are not those who bark the loudest or fight the hardest, but the ones who choose to stay quietly, faithfully, through the darkest nights. Toby didn't just survive. He taught us that healing is possible, not through noise or vengeance, but through presence, kindness, and the courage to trust again. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt lost or found or simply needed a place to breathe, tell us in the comments below. Who was your Toby? Or who did you stay for? And if you believe in second chances, in quiet miracles, and in the power of love that doesn't need to shout,